Now that we've created our inner binding, we're going to make the holes for our outer binding. Just push down those knots and then you can remove those clips. Keep them close to hand because you'll need them in a moment when you punch the holes through the covers. So we're going to be doing an inner and an outer cover, although you really only need 2 outer covers, but I really like having them layered like this. And play around with them until you get them looking how you like. You can see I'm twisting them back and forth until they look pleasing. And then you're going to butt them all up together. Place the scrap paper and the 2 binder clips on the sides, making sure you leave enough room for the template. And then you're going to put your piece of wood back in place just to protect your cutting mat. Put your template in. So I'm using an awl. You could also use a hand drill or a Japanese screw punch. I find with the handmade paper the Japanese screw punch struggles, but if you're using machine made paper it's a good choice. I'm also a big fan of the hand drill, particularly if you've got a thick book block. The hand drill would also work well for the handmade paper. Sometimes you have to sort of manipulate the book block to get the awl all the way through. And remember to go from the front and to the back to make sure you've got good holes. Okay, so let's get to the fun part, which is the sewing. I like to do a practice binding on my template, especially if it's a new one to me or I haven't done it in a while. And I use cheap embroidery floss to do that rather than waste my linen thread. I also like to print out my directions and then have a piece of paper just to sort of move down the line so my eye doesn't skip. So that's something you might find useful. You want to gather your thread. It's 8 times the height of the book, and that's going to be more than enough to make this book. You'll have a few inches left over. Thread your sewing needle. Use one that has as small an eye as possible. And then you're going to remove one of the clips because we need to, I'm just counting the holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, pretty obvious, but just in case. We're going to come in through the spine, through hole number 2 from the center of the book, or at least 3 or 4 pages down. This, I will not lie, is the tricky part, and sometimes you have to push your needle through the other direction just to kind of see where you're going. So you guide the needle through and then pull it up, and we're going to leave at least 6 inches on the inside of the book. Be generous with that, and then push it down. The inner binding kind of gets in the way a little bit, so just push it through the center, and you can use your bone folder if you need to, just to force it down. Just checking all my holes are good and lined up before I put the other binder clip back on with the scrap paper. Now with each stitch you're going to straighten it and pull it tightly as you go. We're going to start by going down hole number 3 from front to back. Pull nice and tight. Going to wrap around the spine and go through hole number 3 again from front to back. There's a lot of thread at this stage, so it's easy to catch it on things. Pull nice and tight. Up through hole number 4 from front to back, from back to front. Wrap around the spine, go through hole number 4 from back to front. Now you're going to wrap the thread around the tail of the book and go back through number 4 from back to front. You're going through that for last hole many times. Straighten and tighten. You're on the front of the book. You're going to come down through hole number 3, wiggle the needle to get it through, pull it out from the back. You're on hole number 3. You're going to come up hole number 2 from back to front. Now you may think that at this stage we should wrap the spine, but we're not going to do that. That's going to be the very last stitch we do. We're going to go up to hole number 1 from front to back. We're going to wrap the spine and go through hole number 1 front to back, tighten the stitch. We're going to wrap around the head of the book, come down through hole number 1 from front to back. And then you're going to come back up from hole number 2 from back to front. And now we're going to start our triangular stitches. You're going to make a diagonal stitch and you're going to go in through hole number 3 from the back to the front. You're going to make a second triangular stitch up through hole number 4 from back to front. You're going to see how I keep fussing with these stitches. If I were you, I'd just fiddle with them at the end. Let's make another diagonal stitch to create our triangle. We're coming up through hole number 3 from back to front. By this time you're probably getting the hang of this and getting a rhythm. Create another diagonal stitch to create your triangle. Come back up through hole number 2 from front to back. So you have 2 triangles. Now you're going to go up the book to hole number 1 front to back, make a diagonal stitch. Hole number 1 and hole number 4 get have to work very hard. Create your last diagonal stitch for your last triangle and come back through hole number 2 from back to front. Can be tricky, and sometimes you find you might need to use pliers to pull that needle through. Now we're going to do that final stitch around the spine that we talked about earlier. Here I go, fussing with the stitches again. Wrap around the spine, and you will notice that all of these stitches are done just once. You'll never see a double thread on a Japanese stab binding, and there are also no gaps. So come up through hole number 2 from back to front. So the way that you know you've done it correctly is that you don't have any sort of double stitches, as it were, that you've done everything in the right order. So next up we're going to finish our book.